This is More Than Work, the podcast reminding you that your self-worth is made up of more than your job title. Each week, I'll talk to a guest about how they discovered that for themselves. You'll hear about what they did, what they're doing, and who they are. I'm your host, Rabia. I work in IT, perform stand-up comedy, write, volunteer, and, of course, podcast. Thank you for listening. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening wherever you are and whenever it is that you're listening. This is the April 13th episode, but you could be listening anytime, which is the beauty of this podcast or any podcast. First of all, I want to let you know if you are listening in April of 2022, Podchaser, Podchaser, is doing an initiative right now where they're donating 25 cents for every review left on their site. So you can review episodes or you can review the actual podcast. And that money is going to World Central Kitchen's efforts in Ukraine. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you saw me look over, that's because I wanted to make sure I was getting it right. But I guess I'll just talk really quick this week. I mean, I don't want to get into too much. I just want to kind of get to the episode. But I did see a couple of musical acts that were really fun in London, and I just want to pass them along to you. So Yard Act, they're an Arctic Monkeys kind of sound post-punk, but have a political little edge to them. So that was a lot of fun. That was a concert where I realized I'm a lot older than I was a couple of years ago when I was standing in a music club for 4 hours bouncing up and down. My knees definitely felt it. And then I saw Anne Lou Cannon, Annliucannon. Those are three names. And she's a singer-songwriter out of London. And I heard she's going to be working on an album, but she's amazing. So look her up. And then True Strays, they're an Americana kind of band out of Bristol, England. And oh man, it was so cool to see them too. And Anne Lou Cannon is why I found them. But anyway, they're all great. They're all a lot of fun in their own different ways. Although I did cry during Anne's set. So maybe that's only fun for some people who want to cry or who are prone to doing that. But it's just nice to get out and see live music again. I really enjoyed that. This episode, this guest is a novelist, but also a lawyer. And he started out a lawyer, but now he's a novelist too. And this was a pure episode of More Than Work. I mean, it really was what I was thinking about when I started the podcast, talking to someone who's in a career, but also find something they love doing and they pursue it. I know a lot of people have said, I want to write a book. I think I have a book in me, but I don't know, just listening to this guest, Kevin, it's hard to do. And I think he's shown a lot of dedication. I also like his approach of researching a lot to do certain aspects of it. So I'm going to leave it at that just because I want to get to the episode and want you to have a listen. Again, leave a review if you would like. If you can subscribe, that'd be awesome. I see reviews and subscriptions and those kind of things coming in on my numbers, and I really appreciate it. I just appreciate you giving me this time every week or just on this episode if you don't come back. But thanks for listening and enjoy. And also have a great day, whatever day you're listening. My guest today is Kevin G. Chapman. He's assistant counsel at Dow Jones and Company and a crime fiction author. So we're going to be talking about both of those things. Thanks for being on today, Kevin.
Oh, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too. So where am I talking to you from today?
I am hunkered down in my basement home office in central New Jersey.
Oh, wow. And were you always working at home or was this new from the pandemic?
No. This is only since COVID.
Yeah.
I'm lucky I have a home that is only about 15 minutes from my office. So my commute was never a big problem. But I worked from home almost never. And now I'm working from home almost always for the last 2 years.
Yeah. Well, it's good you have a dedicated space. That's good at least.
This is the fortune of having grown children. So I have my basement all to myself.
That's good. Nice. Well, so first of all, being assistant general counsel at Dow Jones and Company, when you set out to work in law, did you think you were going to be at a company like that, or were you setting out to do something else?
To tell you the truth, when I left law school, I knew that I wanted to be in this field. I'm a labor and employment lawyer. I had done some work in my law school days in that field. And I thought it was a nice area to be in, but it never really occurred to me to be in-house in a corporation as opposed to working for a law firm. So I went to a big law firm in Manhattan for 5 years. then got laid off from my job at the law firm. That's always fun. And then got another job at a different law firm for 3 years. At that point, my wife and I were living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan with 2 children.
Oh my gosh.
And things were starting to get a little cramped, and we started to think about the future. And my then 5-year-old was in preschool at a lovely place called the Calhoun School on 66th. And the tuition for preschool was a lot.
Yeah.
And we started doing the math about how much it was going to cost us to put our 2 children through private school in Manhattan and then college. And then we said, you know what? The suburbs are starting to look really good. So at that point, I started looking around for what I wanted to do career-wise. And the idea of going in-house at that point really was attractive because you're going to have more time. You're not going to be always at the beck and call of your clients on nights and afternoons and weekends. So I started looking, and I interviewed at 4, 5, 6 different companies, but I landed at the Wall Street Journal at Dow Jones, and it has worked out really well. We have an office here in South Brunswick, New Jersey. So it's central New Jersey, just a little bit north of Princeton. And so, hey, we have a job now and we can get a house now. And we got a house that's 15 minutes away from the office. And then, miracle of miracles, 27 years later, I have the same job. I haven't moved. Amazing. The same house, the same office, the same commute for that whole time. So it has worked out really well for me.
Wow, that's amazing, actually. That really is. And yeah, and it's good that too, going in-house, it changed your work hours and things like that, because even other professions can relate to that. Like if you work for a marketing agency or digital agency, or I'm in consulting, and it's true, you end up adjusting your hours to what a client needs. And it could be 2 different clients. I had a client one time when I was living in California, one in Europe and one in Texas. And that became a really weird long day, so I totally relate.
There's always been a job where you have to put in hours. I mean, no legal job is 9 to 5, but I was always able to leave my office, come home, have dinner with my family, see my children. And, if I had to do 3 or 4 hours of work later on in the evening after the kids have gone to bed or whatever, fine, I can deal with that. But having a lot more control over my life was the big part of moving in-house. So my son actually now is just getting ready to graduate from law school.
Oh, wow.
He's graduating in May. And so I'll have a lot to say to him about the virtues of leaving the law firm life at some point and thinking about a corporate law position. It's been good.
Cool. So you've been doing this job for 27 years, but at some point within that, you started writing fiction. When did that happen?
Yeah, well, it's actually 39 years now, if you count my time at the law firms. And that's how I got into writing, really, is when I got laid off from my very first job. So I was, let's see, it was my daughter's 2nd birthday. I remember the day. And so I'd been at the firm for 5 years out of law school. So I must have been 29 years old. And now I'm suddenly out of a job and I got to start looking for a new one. But I found myself with a lot of spare time, because looking for a job, although that's a full-time job, it leaves a lot of empty space in the day. And you can't rewrite your resume 100 times. And so it was during that lull in my professional career that I got an idea for writing a novel. And I've always been a closet writer. And frankly, being a lawyer, I'm a writer professionally, because that's what I do. I write briefs, I write memos, I write instructional materials. And so writing has always been something I've loved to do. And I had the idea, okay, well, I've got this time. So I had an idea and I started working on a book. So I spent about 3 months working real hard on this book because it gave me something to do while I was just looking for a new job. That was 1991.
Right.
And then I got a new job and stopped working on the book because I had a new job. But I kept working on it off and on. And at that point, I had just the one child, but doesn't still leave you a lot of free time. But I dabbled at it and worked on it from time to time. And finally finished it up about, I want to say 1995 or 1996. And then, of course, what do you do with a book that you just wrote in 1996? Amazon doesn't exist. Self-publishing doesn't exist. Made some inquiries about trying to figure out how you got a book published and quickly learned that I had no chance of getting a book published because who was I? I'm not a celebrity. I got no name. I've got no cred. So it kind of went on the shelf until 2002, when my wife, who is wonderful, coming up on our 20th wedding anniversary, said, "Hey, you know that book? How about as your anniversary present, I pay to have it published?" Because by that time, there were vanity publishers out there that were willing to publish your book. So I went to a company called Ex Libris, which I think still exists, which was an offshoot of, I think it was Random House at that point. But it was strictly you pay and we'll publish your book. And by publish, we mean we'll print it for you. We'll provide no marketing support. We won't put it in bookstores for you. You pay us and we will print copies. And then we'll deliver those copies in big boxes to your house. And then you're on your own from there.
Fun.
But I still have a few of the original and only printing of this book called Identity Crisis. And I gave them out as presents to friends, and I sold, maybe 100 copies. And it's available still on Amazon because, Amazon, and now anything can go up there. But that was my first book. And that got me kind of going. So while I was working, I started that, but it was very slow process. And then after that, about 2003, 2004, I started working pretty hard on what the working title of the book was called The Great American Novel. I said, it's time for me to write the Great American Novel. So if you look in my old archives on my laptop, there's a file under writing called GAN. That was the name, the working title of that book. And I spent 10 years working on that. And as my kids were getting older and I was, working on different things, and I really enjoyed that. But it was a long, slow process where I'd pick it up for a month and put it down, and pick it up 2 months later and put it down. And I eventually got it finished, quote unquote, finished in 2016. So about 10 years I spent working on it. And by then, Amazon. So I was able to self-publish that book. And it is a serious piece of literary fiction. It is about politics and self-identity and morality. And it is wonderful. And it is, it's this generation's The Great Gatsby. And nobody was interested in buying it or reading it because literary fiction is not a real big seller. And again, I'm not a name. Nobody knows who I am. So the book's called A Legacy of One. I actually re-edited it a couple of years ago and republished it with a new cover. And I cut 20,000 words off of what was a way too long a manuscript. And so it's a little better now than it was, but it just sits there. And every once in a while, someone will buy it and read it and send me a note and say, "Oh, I really like this." I said, "Great. Yeah, you and a couple of dozen other people." But I got it out of my system. I did it. I wrote it, and after I die, people will start reading it. It'll be taught in college courses on American literature, but I'll be long gone by then.
So your first two books, basically were done over about 20 years then or something, right? So but I guess when you look at it though, you said you would start and stop and things like that. How did you handle it as far as what you'd tell people you were doing? Because I think what I've seen people do and what I've maybe done, like when I was starting the podcast, I told a lot of people I was starting it. And then if I didn't, it would have been embarrassing in a way to not have done it. Right. And I know like one friend I have was writing a book and he was obsessed about it. And then I asked him the other day, "What happened to your book?" He goes, "Oh, it wasn't very good." And it just kind of stopped. And did you have any of those experiences, or how was it for you? And how did you handle it? You said you were a closet writer or before.
Yeah. I tell you, when I was writing A Legacy of One, I didn't tell people I'm writing a book. It had been going on for such a long time. And it was something that was so sort of far out in the future that I would ever get it finished that I never really made a big deal about it and said to people, I'm writing a book. I had the other book that was available, which was a much more sort of accessible book. It's a detective, a PI book. But no, I didn't really make a big deal about it. It was really more for me than it was for other people. I talked about it a little bit when I went to college class reunion because I went to Columbia undergrad.
Oh,
And the book is set there. About half the book. The book involves characters who all went to Columbia and met each other at Columbia, and then the lives that they had after that. And a lot of it is flashbacks to college days. So I talked to people at Columbia about it. I think there was a note in Alumni Magazine about it after it was published, but didn't really make a big deal about it.
yeah.
I wasn't embarrassed about it. I just didn't think people would be interested.
No, and it's interesting. I had someone on relatively recently. It was Jen Z. Keaton. She has an art gallery now, but she was talking about how people don't create just for fun or just for themselves. Like we're in this world now where people create things, whether it's work of writing or paintings or whatever, to post them in a way. Like there's no connection for us as far as like what we enjoy. So it's interesting to just hear about you writing for the enjoyment of it and for you and to get a story out, but not necessarily for this other purpose, right? I mean, it would have been nice, yeah, of course, if it sold millions of copies, whatever, but I like just hearing about that kind of experience that you had. So then just looking at the writing practice you had, which seems to have been kind of on and off, now you have a series of novels that we'll talk about. Is your writing practice different now that you're doing more in series, and how's that changed?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I used to find occasional times to pick up the book and work on it because I'm busy. I've got children. I've got work obligations. I was traveling a lot in those years too for business. I do a lot less traveling now for a variety of reasons, not just related to COVID, but it was something that I would do when I had time, but it was never the first thing on my to-do list ever. It was always down there, third or fourth on my to-do list. Then I got to the point after I finished A Legacy of One, got that out. Two of my kids had graduated from high school, were off to college. I just had one kid at home at that point, and it was, the rest of my life was kind of sitting there in front of me where we're not going to have children at home. I'm going to have a lot more free time. My work is still busy, but I had an opportunity to spend a little more time. And it was that point I decided that I wanted to write something fun, but not just something fun, but something that I might actually be able to sell. And you're right.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, let me write something that people might really want to buy. And I had actually written a short story back in 2012 for a short story writing competition that was sponsored by the New Jersey Corporate Counsel Association, of all things.
Yeah.
So it was all lawyers and judges, and the stories had to be about crime or law. And I decided not to go for law, but to go for crime. And so I wrote this short story. It was called Fool Me Twice. And it starred an NYPD homicide detective named Mike Stoneman. And I won first prize in the short story competition, which was nice. Got me a free year's worth of dues to the association and free admission to all the events that the association does over the course of the year. So that was fun. But when I sat down to say, what do I want to write now? I went back to Mike Stoneman and that short story and said, I really liked that story. I really liked that character. Let me see if I can come up with a whole novel that's just based on that character. And then I started writing what became Righteous Assassin. And Righteous Assassin could not be any more different from A Legacy of One. I mean, it was just fun. It was, fiction. It's murder. It's a serial murderer case. It's got a lot of relationships in it. And all the books are really about the relationships between the characters. That's really what makes those kinds of fiction books fun. And so I cranked that out in a relatively quick 2 years. So from 2016 to 2018, I worked on Righteous Assassin. And that was really the first time that I started making the writing the top thing on my to-do list. So after all the work obligations were done, and, after, obviously my wife and I, my family have a certain amount of obligations and fun things that we do. But whenever I had a moment that was not otherwise booked on my schedule, the writing became the first thing that I would work on. And that really was a change. It was also a change in that with self-publishing the way it is now, over the last 10 years, I really kind of knew what I was doing a lot more. And I started thinking about when I decided to publish the book, how was it going to work? I started to work on a marketing plan for the book before it was published, as opposed to waiting until after it was published and then thinking about the marketing plan. I was doing a lot of reading online about fiction, about self-publishing, and about crime fiction and marketing crime fiction. I was watching podcasts and reading blog articles and trying to educate myself about the business side of self-publishing. And so, yeah, that was a real change in my attitude and my focus when I was going through that. And certainly since then, from between 2018 and 2021, I published 4 more books.
Yeah.
So suddenly I'm a writer, not just a lawyer who wrote a book, but now I really feel like I'm an author, and I'm doing that now consistently.
Has your enjoyment of it changed with just having a different way of looking at it?
A little bit, but not that much. My wife and I have a firm commitment to the idea that I'm not going to write anything that I'm not having fun with. If I'm not enjoying the story, then don't write it. I'm not trying to crank out books just for the sake of cranking out books. So we spend a lot of time brainstorming over the plots and the characters and working on what's going to be an interesting twist for the next book. I wrote one that was all set on a cruise ship called Lethal Voyage. And I did that specifically because my wife and I are big cruisers. We love going on cruises. We haven't been on one for 2 years because of COVID. But it's always been something that we really loved doing. So particularly since COVID had started, this was an opportunity for me to write a book about being on a cruise. Yeah. So, and we took people who we had met on cruises and put them in the book. We took crew members who we had really liked or hated on cruises and put them in the book. And so it was a lot of fun. It was really a joy to work on that story because I was reliving a lot of fun experiences of my own life. And that was great. Yeah. So if I'm not enjoying it, I don't want to write it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then people might not enjoy reading it if it's not something you enjoy writing too, right? That could go along with it. And that book that you just mentioned, Lethal Voyage, won a Kindle Book Award in 2021, right? So can you talk about how that came about?
I figured out early on that there were all these various writing competitions that you could submit your books to. And it's nice when you get recognition of some kind. This book is a semi-finalist, or this book is a finalist. And, it's nice to be able to say to people, yeah, this stuff is not crap because look, it was recognized by this book award as being worthy of at least some level of recognition. Yeah. So I think it helps. I think it helps give you some credibility when you're an independent author who doesn't have a long track record. So I had submitted both Righteous Assassin and the second book in the series, Deadly Enterprise, to the Kindle Book Award competition. And both of them made the semifinal list, but never advanced to the finalist list. But Lethal Voyage did very well. It was a finalist for the Clue Award, which is given out by the Chanticleer Book Review. It was a finalist for the award given out by In Detail magazine, which is a magazine that specializes in independent publishing. And then it won the Kindle Book Award as Best Mystery Thriller of the Year for 2021. So I was thrilled to finally get one that I actually got first place. And so that was just this past November, so about 4 or 5 months ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm working on trying to figure out a way to take that and turn it into more sales. But it's nice. It's nice to be able to say, hey, this one won the award. It was the best book of the year in its genre. And the Kindle Book Award is great because it doesn't have 65 different categories. It's only got 7 categories. So it means something more when you win an award where all of the mysteries and thrillers and suspense books are all in one category, and your book was the best. So that was nice.
Yeah, that is great. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So as far as Mike Stoneman, you described a little bit about him, but one question is, the Mike Stoneman in the original short story you did you have to change much of him to kind of flesh him out into this full character that was going to live in multiple novels, or was he kind of established really well in that short story that you kind of knew him enough to keep going with him?
He's morphed a lot over time. The character is the same, but a short story is a short story. There's only so much you can do about backstory for a character when you only got 5,000 words. That was the crazy thing about that competition, is they didn't announce that there was a word limit until I had finished the story. So
Oh my gosh.
the story was 8,000 words. And then they announced that the limit was going to be 5,000 words.
You're like,
So
okay.
I had to do a lot of editing, which is a great exercise in editing. But the character intrigued me, and so I wrote a lot of a backstory for Mike. I've got pages and pages and pages of Mike Stoneman's backstory that has never made it into any of the books yet, but it's just kind of there so that I know who he is and his motivations and his history. But he's been a lot of fun to work with. He's not me. There's a little bit of me in him though,
Yeah.
and so he's like my proxy in these books, which is it's been a lot of fun.
You're not done with him yet after 5 books?
Probably not, although I'm not writing a Mike Stoneman book right now. I got finished with the 5 books. At the end of book 5, and I'm not going to do any spoilers here, but at the end of book 5, there's kind of a pause. There's been a story arc that started with Righteous Assassin, and that story arc reaches its conclusion in the 5th book called Perilous Gambit, which is set in Las Vegas, another one of my favorite places in the world. So I got to write a story that was set in Las Vegas. That was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But now I am working on a book that is set in the same universe as the Mike Stoneman books, but has nothing to do with Mike Stoneman and is a completely separate standalone story with different characters. Mm. And here is where things change, because I've been trying to find a literary agent who would be interested in taking me on as a client and then maybe trying to help me find a traditional publisher who might be interested in my stories. And whatever other adaptations can be made from my stories, because all my fans keep telling me, "Oh, when is Mike Stoneman going to be on Netflix?" I said, as soon as Netflix calls.
Yeah, exactly.
But you need an agent for that. You can't do anything on derivative works without going through an agent. And every agent I have spoken to has told me the same thing, which is we're not interested in a series that has already started and has already been self-published.
Huh.
Apparently, publishers aren't interested. They want to get in on the ground floor or nothing. And so I've said, well, what if I wrote a book that wasn't part of the series? And they said, well, in that case, send it to me. Let me look at it. Huh. So I'm now writing a book that is very specifically targeted for trying to get a traditional publisher and trying to get an agent. And we'll see if it works. If it doesn't work, then fine. I'll self-publish this next one. And then I probably am going to go back to Mike Stoneman, because Mike and Michelle and Jason and Rachel and the main characters, they're not done. There's a lot for them still. And I've got a folder full of story outlines for Mike Stoneman that are still yet to be written. So I'm definitely going to go back there. But right now I've got a different focus. And that focus is totally driven by marketing and publishing and my desire to try to find an agent. And so, well, sometimes you do things for specific reasons.
Yeah, that's really cool though, in that you've been able to learn more about the industry, and so you can focus there, because it makes sense at some point when you're spending this much time doing it to try to make something of it. So if someone wants to read the Mike Stoneman series, they should start at the beginning then, is that correct? Because there's ongoing storylines, or can they just grab whichever one?
They're all standalone stories. So there are no cliffhangers at the end. So it's not like you have to read them in order. It's always good, I think, to start at the beginning to get to know the characters as they progress. Because there's a lot of interpersonal development. There is a story arc, as I said, that is really around the characters and their relationships and how they build from one book to the next. I wouldn't recommend jumping in at the end. I wouldn't pick it up with book 5 and read Perilous Gambit and then go back to read the earlier book. But you can jump in and read Lethal Voyage, for example. It's a totally standalone, separate story. And if you like those characters, then you can go back and read the first 2 books and see what happened that brought them to the point where they were in book 3, and even book 4, which is called Fatal Infraction, which is about the murder of the quarterback of the New York Jets, which is another one of my great fantasies. I'm a long-suffering Jets fan, so I got to write a book about murdering the quarterback. You could read that book as a standalone, and there's a few things in there that you're picking up kind of in the middle of the relationships, but it's not a big problem. You can pick it up there and then go back and figure out what happened. But it's always better to start at the beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you ever at this point suffer from writer's block. I know some people I've actually read an article that said writer's block doesn't exist. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I guess you haven't had it, but do you ever face that now? Or since you're making up the story, do you get pretty clear before you even go?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I'm a compulsive outliner. So when I start working on a story, I have a general concept of the really broad outlines of the story, but then I sit down and I start outlining the major plot lines and the major characters and then what's going to happen. And by the time I sit down to actually start drafting and writing dialogue and, describing scenes, the book is done in my head because I've outlined basically every chapter of the book. And now it's just a question of filling in the details. But for me, I'm not doing it full time. I mean, I still have a day job. And so my writing is a diversion from my work. And in that respect, if I have writer's block in the sense of I'm working on the outline for a book and I'm just kind of stuck on what's going to happen next, so I just put it down for a week and I focus on other things. I mean, I got plenty of other things I can focus on, and then I can come back to it. I will tell you, I get a lot of my best ideas in the shower. I wake up in the morning and I'm sitting in the shower and I'm, oh, wait a minute, what if I did that? And now my biggest problem is trying to remember what I was thinking by the time I get out of the shower and dry off and get dressed and go downstairs and make a note about what I was thinking. Because my memory is not as good as it used to be, I guess.
I'm the same. Like, I do stand-up comedy and I'll think of something. If I don't write it down then, it's gone. It may or may not come back. And sometimes it's a bummer that it doesn't, because I was like, oh, I was really laughing earlier. What was I laughing at?
Do you have a pad of paper next to your bed?
I have them everywhere. It looks like, like in that movie Signs where that girl had all the water glasses everywhere. I'm like that with my paper. There's a lot of paper in this place.
You dream something and you wake up and say, what was I just dreaming about? Okay.
I know.
Write it down.
I know. It's hard. So are you an avid reader?
I am. I don't read as much as I used to just because of time constraints. Oddly enough, what has happened to me is that I'm a member of a book club at my workplace. So I read whatever the book club reads. Some of which is very disappointing, unfortunately. The things that are on the bestseller list, that are on the Oprah book club list, and you read them and you say, that didn't really impress me that much. But I read a lot of independent work, because I'm a member of a couple of different groups of independent authors. So we read each other's stuff. I do some beta reading for some of my author friends to help them, get feedback on their stories. I'm a member of a group of authors who exchange books and read them and do critiques of each other's stuff. And so I end up reading a lot of independently published material, but very little bestsellers. I mean, I used to read John Grisham, and I love Sarah Paretsky and Linda Barnes and Michael Connelly, all of Michael Connelly's stuff. And since I've really been focused the last 3 or 4 years on the writing and trying to get these books done, I've had less and less time to just sit down and enjoy a book just for the sake of reading. So but I think you have to read. You have to read other people's things. You can't just focus on what you're writing without reading other people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's part of it for sure. And I find too, like when I'm performing comedy more, I'll see it because I'm at the club. So I'll see other people, but I don't when I'm home, I don't focus on watching it. A lot of friends are like, oh, did you see this special? You see this special? It's like, no, because I was out in the club till 11 o'clock. So I couldn't, but yeah, that's cool. I like too that you guys have a community of people that sounds like supportive of each other rather than in nasty competitions or something like that. It's funny with creative people, and it's something I think coming from the corporate world, it's a different mindset. The creatives, like, they tend to be more supportive of each other. I mean, there are like weird little interactions with certain personalities, but overall it's more supportive because it's kind of like if someone succeeds, they succeed. It doesn't change the fact that you might or might not succeed. Where in corporate life, if someone gets a promotion, you didn't, and it's very cut and dry. That's what my experience is.
Well, I can see how that might be the case for a lot of people. I'll tell you that as an in-house lawyer, I'm a member of an association of in-house counsel called the ACC, Association of Corporate Counsel. And I've been very active in that group. I'm was for a couple of years the chairperson of the labor and employment section of the group. That group of people is amazingly supportive because we're all doing pretty much the same thing for different companies.
Right.
But, so I can pick up the phone and call one of my colleagues to say, hey, I'm dealing with this. What are you doing about this? Because you probably are dealing with the same problem. I've got a telephone call later today with about 100 in-house counsel. We've been having this phone call every 2 weeks for the last year and a half, and it's talking about COVID. What are you doing about this? What are you doing about that? What are you doing about vaccinations? What are you doing about, social distancing? What are you doing about contact tracing? And we're all sharing with each other because we're not really in competition with each other. We're all trying to do the best job we can for our companies, and we're all trying to help each other. So it's a great organization of in-house lawyers. So I don't really feel that any competition with them, and so that's also a very supportive group, much like the writers groups that I work with. We're all trying to sell the same product more or less to the same audience more or less, but the audience is hundreds of millions of people. And, the time between books is such that, I have a newsletter. So I plug other authors to my newsletter readers in between my own books, because if my newsletter readers are just waiting for my next book, it's going to be a year.
Yeah.
And, so they got to read something else in between. So I'm happy to help other authors if I think the authors are writing good books. Right. I don't mind trying to direct my readers to those other authors, especially if they're, running deals and they can get their book for 99 cents or $1.99 or something, or free. Oh, here's a book you should think about getting, because my next one's not coming for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. And that's good with the professional association too. I think it's more what I've seen is when you're in the same company with people who are in the same kind of job. So besides writing and your career as corporate counsel, you also are a tournament poker player, correct?
I do play. I used to play a lot more. Would like to play a lot more, but COVID did a number on that as well. But yeah, I play poker, which is a lot like what I do for work, in the sense that I do labor negotiations, and labor negotiations and poker have a lot of similarities.
So how did you get into doing that at the tournament level versus just casually playing?
That's an interesting question. I always used to play poker with my buddies and just, home games and things. But I guess it was really when internet poker became a really big thing in the late 90s. Even after that, I guess the early 2000s. I was not getting out a lot in those days. I had 3 kids at home, and playing poker online became something that was fun to do. And on that, you can play tournaments, or you can play cash games, but tournaments were always a little more fun for me. And then Atlantic City is not that far, about 90 minutes from where I live. So my buddies and I would, a couple of times a year, would take a little road trip down to Atlantic City, and we would play poker tournaments down there. And that's really how I kind of got into it. But it's fun. That's another nice diversion, because when you're sitting at a poker table, you're totally focused on what's going on, and you totally forget about all the other cares you have in the world, work, or family, or stress, or whatever it is. It takes a total back seat, and you just focus on what you're doing at the table. And so I like that.
Awesome. That's great that you have these other things outside of work to balance you out. I think that's really important. And I'm kind of inspired just by what you're doing with writing too, to be honest, because I think I'm one of those people who's always said, like, oh, I have a book in me. Do you have any advice or mantra that you would like to share, or that kind of resonates with you a lot, that you go back to?
No, for me, at this point, I'm 61 years old, and one day I'm gonna write a memoir, but I'm not old enough yet. I got a few more years of experience in front of me, but you got to find things you like and just do them. I know too many people who complain that they wish they had something in their lives that they really enjoyed. I say, well, why don't you go find it and do it? They're out there. And for me, there's my writing and my poker. I'm a big New York Mets fan, so baseball season, which is little tough right now with the work stoppage, but you find something you enjoy and you just go do it. I mean, if you want to do a podcast, do a podcast. Find a subject matter that you're interested in and just do it. I mean, there's 1,000, 1 million people out there who have the same interest as you. Just go find them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's actually, I think, really good. And I feel like every time someone hears that advice, maybe another person will do something. That's what I always hope. So if you do something, write to me and let me know, and I'll let Kevin know too. So the last set of questions I have are called the Fun Five, and it's my way of kind of putting everyone into a control group, really, I guess. What's the oldest t-shirt you have and still wear?
I will confess to being a huge Star Trek nerd. And so I actually have a t-shirt that says Starfleet Academy that I got from the Star Trek experience in Las Vegas in about 2003 or something like that.
Nice.
And I still pull that out and exercise in it. I don't wear it out in public a whole lot, but it's definitely still in the active rotation.
Nice. That's cool. And that's a good age. Sometimes I have people who are they're really young, or people just go, well, I throw everything away. And I'm like, oh, but I like that you've kept it. Good. Thank you. So as we all know, I mean, during the pandemic, especially it's still the pandemic, but during the time when we were isolating, it felt like Groundhog's Day a lot for a lot of us, like the movie. And so what song would you have your alarm clock play every day if it was Groundhog's Day? And you were Bill Murray, which
I was Bill Murray.
Yeah. I mean, that'd be cool.
I mean, it'd be nice to be Bill Murray. Good to be Bill Murray. I do remember one time in my life when the alarm went off right at the moment that Van Halen was singing "Jump," and I say that will wake you up in the morning. Jump!
Yeah,
I'm awake. I think that's probably it. That's probably my wake up song is "Jump."
Right. Awesome. All right, that's cool. And that will wake you up. That was a fun video too. All right, so coffee or tea or neither?
Tea, only tea. Don't ever drink coffee.
What kind of tea do you like?
This morning I'm drinking Lyons Irish breakfast tea. I have a tea maker in my little home office here behind me. I have a bar in my basement. And so early on in the pandemic, I brought a coffee machine down to the basement, plugged it in. So I make a whole pot of tea every morning, and nice. I drink tea all day long. And for some reason, I missed the formative years when you learn how to like coffee. I never learned how to like coffee.
That's not bad. It's not healthy, pretty much, because the caffeine really gets a bit rough. And you find that out the first time you get a headache from not having it and realize, yep.
Coffee withdrawal. No.
Yeah, exactly. So can you think of something that just makes you crack up when you think of it, or laughs hard you cry, or something that happened recently?
I would say what consistently makes me laugh is Monty Python. I'm dating myself a little bit there, but I told you I'm old. But we have a whole series of Monty Python on DVDs that we still watch. Yeah, and always when you need a laugh, that's where we go.
Do you say lines to each other like I like to mention the constantly. Shrubberies?
Roger the Shrubber. Yes. Okay. Yes, absolutely. My wife and I, the first movie we ever went to see together was The Life of Brian. And that was wonderful. Our son's middle name is Brian as a result. And we recite lines to each other from movies all the time. Airplane is a big one. Lots of lines from that. Yeah, we have a whole language we could speak in that's just movie lines that other people probably wouldn't even understand.
That's awesome. Cool. And then the last question is, who inspires you right now?
Well, I mean, right now, I think that we're all inspired by Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, who was a comic. So you could be inspired by that. You could be the president of a country.
Well, I'm just would I do a good job? Probably not. But I'm only doing 5-minute sets right now. So maybe he had worked his way up.
But it's amazing. It's amazing to watch how he's handling this situation. And it's got to be just every moment of every day is just anguish. And he has been an inspiration, I think, to his people and to the rest of the world. So he's now elevated himself to a status that is probably going to stick with him. I hope he lives long enough to enjoy it.
Yeah, I agree. He's really incredible.
He's a star is rising.
Yeah. So as far as how people should look you up, where do you want them to go and how do you want them to find you?
Well, they certainly can find me at my website, which is very easy. It's kevingchapman.com, and everything you need from me is there. The books, the audio books, which are their own story. I've self narrated all my audio books.
Oh, so, awesome!
Yeah, that's been a whole process of what do you do with that marketplace, and how do you get into it, and you just do it yourself sometimes.
Yeah,
and it's all there.
Did you have to go to a voice coach or anything, or you just
a lot of trial and error? My father's actually a radio guy, so I grew up around somebody talking into a microphone. But there was a lot of trial and error trying to figure out the technical aspects of how to create an audiobook, and I made them all. Made all the mistakes.
Yeah,
and 5 audiobooks, 6 if you count re-recording Righteous Assassin, which I had to go back and re-record the whole book from start to finish.
Oh, wow.
Well, it was necessary because of things that happened the first time around. That's 100 hours of my life I'm never going to get back, but yeah, that's fine. But no, it was a great process, and now that I've done it enough, I feel like I'm able to do it without necessarily feeling like a novice at it. But that was a journey.
Yeah,
it was a process.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But they're all there on my website, and people can find me there. I got a Facebook group for the Mike Stoneman series called the Mike Stoneman Thriller Group. So you can also find me there on Facebook.
Okay, super. Well, thank you. And I'll have all that in the show notes. So, Kevin, it was really a lot of fun talking to you. Thanks for being on.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a nice afternoon.
Thanks for listening. You can learn more about the guest and what was talked about in the show notes. Joe Maffia created the music you're listening to. You can find him on Spotify at Joe, Maffia. Rob Metke does all the design, for which I am so grateful. You can find him online by searching Rob, Metke. Please leave a review if you like the show, and get in touch if you have feedback or guest ideas. The pod is on all the social channels at More Than Work Pod or at Rabia Comedy on TikTok, and the website is morethanworkpod.com. While being kind to others, don't forget to be kind to yourself.